Great. Can I speak to you on the telephone straight after the shiur?
To me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So we'll just talk for a couple of minutes, okay?
Of course.
All right. So, share screen. Let's share the screen. Moreh Nevukhim, number 21. Who would have believed it? Number 21. Here we go. All right. So, Kavanat Klal HaTorah. The reason, in general, for the mitzvot in the Torah are twofold. Shnei dvarim. V'em tikun hanefesh v'tikun haguf. Okay, Rambam has said what he said about everything in the world being a matter of wisdom and not will, must include the mitzvot as well. And so we now know that we have to understand the reasons for the mitzvot. Every single mitzvah has a reason. You might call it a chok or a statute, or which is a misnomer, but it's something that doesn't have a reason. Absolutely not. Everything has a reason. Every single mitzvah, and that reason is a rational one. And the rational basis of the reason of the mitzvot lie in two principles. One is the mitzvot are there either to improve the welfare of an individual in society, and of course to improve the welfare of the soul. Now notice that tikkun nefesh comes before tikkun haguf. Maimonides, as always, the philosopher, the Greek philosopher, Aristotelian, believes that we are here on earth to reach our perfection as human beings. Many of us will have to rest content with only a little bit of perfection. But there are some of us, very few, who can, as it were, get to the top of the ladder. And the rest of the world, as it were, is like the stage for these exceptional souls. This, of course, would have been very familiar to any Greek person and any follower of Aristotle. In the Greek city-states, the idea of perfection was to be a perfect citizen. Perfect citizen, of course, was someone who was perfect in every way. Correct, Jean? You're a philosopher, politician, you sat on the big jury, you're a member of parliament, you were an athlete, you were very healthy, you're a great sportsman, you ran a marathon in record time, and of course you had slaves to do all of the hard work. There are many people in society who engaged in trade and commerce. You didn't. So there is, of course, as we've said on many occasions, a very strongly elitist principle underlying Rambam. But if we accept that, so we have to understand tikkun nefesh and tikkun haguf. The first thing you need to aim for, the real aim in life for a human being, is to become intellectually and spiritually perfect. In order to do that, you need to have a healthy body and a functioning society that allows you to devote yourself to becoming that type of perfect person. But tikkun nefesh comes on top of tikkun haguf. It's always the mind and the soul. They are before the body and before the welfare of society. Because tikkun haguf doesn't only mean being healthy. It means that you live in a society where there's peace and quiet. But not only is there peace and quiet in the sense of the philosopher Hobbes, that we are protected from evil, but it is a society in which people actively work for a better society. They give charity, they have empathy, they feel sympathy, they care about each other. This is the perfect background for growing the perfect person. Omnam, tikkun hanefesh hu shenitnu la'amon deot amitiyot. But the Rambam, of course, cannot be entirely Greek, because we are, after all, as Jews, conscious of the importance of every single one of our co-religionists. So Rambam has to grade, and he says every person in society, wherever they happen to be, should be given a chance to accumulate some intellectual and spiritual perfection, kefi choltam, according to their ability. So they will all potentially be on a track to the highest point. Because many people will not even understand what it means to have intellectual or spiritual perfection, you have to give them easy ways of comprehension, a parable or some type of explanation, some type of homily, some type of drasha. Because if you're going to give them the thing as it is, you're going to really tell them what they have to understand. It's a bit like philosophy. How many of us love to listen to lengthy lectures or read big, heavy, thick books on philosophy? It's hard, it's difficult, doesn't speak to us. So we have to dilute and make it attractive. Omnam, תיקון הגוף יהיה בתיקון ענייני מחייתם, קצתם עם קצתם, וזה העניין יושלם בשני דברים. Now, the תיקון הגוף, that is the welfare of society, consists of two things. להסיר החמאס מביניהם, to get rid of the Hamas. That's the first thing we need to do. Okay, here it means the violence, but it means to get rid of Hamas. Okay, Maimonides, והוא שלא יעשה כל איש מבני האדם הישר בעיניו וברצונו ויכולתו. People should not abuse their power, אבל יעשה כל אחד מהם מה שבו תועלת הכל. We work for the betterment of society as a whole. השני, ללמד כל איש מבני האדם מידות מועילות בחברה, and to make people better, עד שיסודר עניין המדינה. So we have a well-functioning state. ודעת ששתי הכוונות האלה, האחת מהן בלא ספק קודמת במעלה, היא תיקון הנפש. Now, of course, the spiritual, intellectual aim is the higher one, okay? But the lower one, the improvement of society, has to occur first in time and in nature, because you cannot get to the intellectual and spiritual without having health and society, and I guess a little bit of wealth doesn't hurt either, and all those things that we need in order to flourish. רצוני לומר, תיקון הגוף היא הנהגת המדינה ותיקון ענייני אנשיה כפי היכולת. The best ordered society. והשנית קודמת בטבע ובזמן. וזאת השנית, 11, line, היא הצריכה יותר תחילה והיא אשר הפליג לדקדק בה ולדקדק בחלקיה. Now, this is the one, if it was to translate literally, that we are particular with and we are particular with its parts. So here I'm just going to give you an illustration of the commentaries on the Moreh Nevukhim. So we're going to move down from line 12 to line 28. This phrase, which I've bolded, is picked up by Profiat Duran, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe Halevi. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe Halevi, Profiat Duran, okay, is one of the major commentators on the Guide for the Perplexed, and he was forced in the persecution of 1391 to become a Catholic. He was baptized forcibly. Now, you have to understand, I'm sure you do, that life was always on the edge in the Iberian Peninsula. This is 100 years or so, and one before 1492, and there was a huge purge in Spain, and Jews were slaughtered, burned, they fled. The Rivash, the great Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshet, okay, Perfet, fled to Algiers, and the rabbi we're talking about had to convert, and his name was Profiat Duran, the Christian name, and in Hebrew the commentary is called Ephodi. Now, Ephodi, of course, ephod is a special garment worn by a priest, but it's also the acronym of Ani Profiat Duran. I am Profiat Duran. The amazing thing about Profiat Duran is that after he had become a Catholic and went to shul, no, I mean church, and he knew the whole mass and all the catechism, everything by heart, he in secret wrote anti-Christian books in Hebrew. one of which was Klimat HaGoyim, the shame that the Goyim need to feel for the way they've treated the Jews. Klimat HaGoyim. Now, he wrote several of these books, and the interesting thing is that the Catholics who read them, and they could read Hebrew, Dominicans, etc., they didn't really understand, because he wrote it very skillfully, and they thought it was a book praising Christianity. But every Jew who got hold of it realized exactly what it was, and eventually, of course, it was burned, but it took them about 70 years to realize that the book, in fact, was an insidious attack on the Christian religion as practiced by the Catholics in Spain. Now, he's considered like the Rashi on the Moreh Nevukhim. He takes the words and phrases and explains them. The Shem Tov and the Abarbanel take the concepts and the ideas, so you can say they're a little more like the Baalei HaTosafot. And we're now going to read what a Fodi says. Line 28, Ratzo Omar, שהעריכה תורה בענייני הדינים והממונות הירושה יותר ממה שהעריכה בענייני הדעות שניתנו לנו לתקן הנפש. He says that the Torah is much more generous with regard to the lower type of perfection, namely improving society, than it is in relation to the higher type, which is, I guess, for the aristocrats of the spirit. So you'll find many more mitzvot dealing with contract, with insurance, with crime, with looking after animals, with tort, preventing damage. All of these things fill up much of the Torah. But the ideal, which is love and fear of God, knowledge of his existence, acknowledgement of his unity, and the fact that he rewards and punishes, and that he is aware of what people do, you have to look hard in the Torah to find that said. There are about 4 mitzvot. V'ahavta, liyira, v'yadata hayom, okay, leman yedu. So knowledge, the awe and the love of God, which are what we call the metaphysical epitome, okay, of the intellectual and the spiritual path, very limited, because as Rambam says, you can't give away too much because people will not understand. So you give it to them in a small dose, but the basic point about the establishment of a well-functioning society, that everybody can grasp, and so it's at great length. We now know what that phrase means. You have to go through social improvement before you get to higher perfection, and that's because we are human beings, and because, as Aristotle said, we are a zoon politikon, meaning political animal. We have perforce to live in society, which is another Jewish ideal. So this is how the Rambam is beginning to lead us into a philosophy of what it means to have a path to perfection through a system of mitzvot. V'hu sheyeh bari al hatov, etc. We're going to move down to line 17. Umuvuar, shehu zeh shleimut acharon en bo ma'asim v'lo midot, v'omnam hu deot levad. Very important line. The ultimate perfection is not practical. It's not doing anything. The ultimate perfection is in ethical virtues and deot, the life of the mind. That life of the mind we described in detail where we said that somebody will be absolutely ethical. Everybody will love him or her because they always do the right thing. But inside, they are constantly thinking and rising in understanding. And this is the connection between knowledge of God and love of God, learning about everything there is to learn in the world and bringing this up to the level of a relationship with God. Okay? This is what we are now, and we're getting very familiar with this now. Correct? Absolutely. Everybody, we know this. Okay? So, let's continue. Ki ha'adam yevshar lo sheyatzir muskal ועוד שיש לו כאב או רעב חזק או צמא או חום או קור חזק. You cannot become perfect if you're struggling with hot or cold or pain or hunger. אבל אחר הגיע השלמות הראשון, אפשר להגיע לשלמות האחרונה שהוא הנכבד, בלא ספק והוא סיבת החיים המתמידים לא זולתו. Then he says that once you've gotten through the stage of improvement of society and everything is going hunky-dory, then you can advance on the path to intellectual and spiritual perfection, and you can, this is the springboard for, now what is Hachayim HaMatmidim? Jean, how would you translate that? Unmute. What is Hachayim HaMatmidim?
Smelling damp down here. We need another machine.
Eternal life is not a good translation, but
What are you listening to? It's the rabbi.
I think we have to, can we have quiet, please? The rabbi has asked for quiet. Thank you very much. Okay, Jean, what is the translation to English of Hachayim HaMatmidim?
eh bien, I would say the eternal life, but I don't think it's exactly what you mean, what he means.
All right, you said eternal life, right?
Yes.
Okay. Eternal life, but not sure. So let's have a look at the Ephodi. Go down to line 28. Ratzal Omar, Hachayim HaNafshiyim HaNitzchiyim. There we are. The eternal life of the soul. Zeh הפרק הוא כדמות מפתח לתת כמה המצוות שהתורה בכללה מקפת על שני אלו הסוגים, והם שלמות הנפש ושלמות הגוף. In other words, it's also, of course, the eternal life of the soul after the physical life has ceased to be. So Hachayim HaMatmidim is eternal life, which is free of anything physical at all. All right. So this is the path to perfection. Rambam has a drasha. He cites a pasuk למען ייטב לך וארכת ימים, אמרו למען ייטב לך, לעולם שכולו טוב. The good is the spiritual, not physical, but you need to have arichut yamim. You need to have long days to achieve it, and therefore you start with l'chayotenu kayom hazeh. Amida Gashmit, you start with the physical, the corporeal, and then you move up to the spiritual. Okay, by means of a perfect society. All right, so let's have a look at number 3, line 32. Okay, this is line 32, and we read, Mima shetzarich shetit'orer alav hu sheteda she'adayot amitiyot asher behem yagia השלמות האחרון, אמנם ניתנה התורה מהם בתכליתם וצוותה להאמין בהם בכלל, מציאות אלוה וייחודו וידיעתו ויכולתו רצונו וקדמותו. So what are the principles we really need to work on? They are God's existence, his unity, knowledge of him, and the fact that he is able to do all, his omnipotence, omniscience. These are all final goals, but they are not going to be made clear to us. Okay, only after Yidiat Deot Rabot, only after we know everything else. So we have to know everything there is to know in the world, the entire body of knowledge. Now he also says there are some things we need to believe because they are politically important, like God is angry if you're not going to keep his laws. This everybody can understand. Simple people, okay, especially, need to be threatened, okay? This is what Rambam is saying, that we need to tell people that God will be angry and God will punish, because if not, they will simply do what they want to do. So this is not an act, it's not a deed. He's not saying put on tefillin or don't eat treif. God is saying, I'll be angry with you if you don't keep the laws. Now, why is God interested in you keeping the laws when the laws are only, as it were, stepping stones to perfection? And what he wants is your perfection, your relationship with him. But he understands that unless people are threatened, as it were, with sanctions, they won't even keep the basic laws about a proper society. So therefore, he does put in these ideas about God punishing people, about him rewarding people, even though all of that is not what he really wants. But he knows that that is necessary for the possibility that society and that some people will be able to get on the track and eventually reach the perfection of knowledge. Okay. But okay, so having said that, he's talked about the fear and the yira, the fear and the awe. Mimrotable. Okay, vomnam. Line 36. שאר הדעות האמיתיות בכלל זה המציאות אשריהם החוכמות העילויות כולם כבי רוב מיניהם אשר בהם יתאמתו הדעות ההם אשריהם התכלית האחרות. In order to get to love of God, all of God, unity, understanding of his power and omniscience, etc., we have to know everything, okay? Even though the Torah hasn't told you in one of its mitzvot, Torah doesn't say study mathematics, study grammar, study languages, study history, study biology, study geology, study astronomy. Does it? Is there a mitzvah to do this? No, there isn't. So Rambam says you got to understand that this is my theory of condensed mitzvot. When it says la'avah et Hashem, to love the Lord, how do you get to love God? V'ahavta et Hashem Elohecha. How do you do it? וכבר ידעת מה שבא מחוזק המצווה באהבה, בכל לבבך ובכל מאודיך. And that mitzvah to love God, wow, is with all your heart, all your soul, all your might. But how do you do it? Well, how do you do it? וכבר ביארנו במשנת תורה, שזאת האהבה לא תיתכן אלא בהשגת המציאות כולו כפי משהו הוא ובחינתו חוכמתו בו. It is by understanding God's wisdom in the universe, in life, in the structure of the human body, and in all knowledge. And this is in his Mishneh Torah. Now, the Mishneh Torah, the Rambam, as we know in the yeshivas, okay, was written in 1180, decade or so before the Guide for the Perplexed. It's the same Rambam. There's no question. Rambam, from an early age, was creating this philosophical framework that he gives us towards the end of his life, 10 years or so before his death, okay? But the seeds are there. Let's just go down and read the Mishneh Torah. Line 20 on page 2. How do you get to love and God and to be in awe of him? You have to study the world, know it in great detail. Then you will love, and you will want, and you will have a great desire. It's interesting because the Rambam's concept of love is definitely a very strong one, but it's a strong one. He says you will mitaveh tavad dola, you have a great passion. You'll be filled with this great passion. Leida Hashem, to know God. It's almost erotic, okay? Passion, yidiyah. Kemosh Amar David, and he cites David in the Psalms. Sama nafshi lelohim le'elchai. My soul thirsts for God, the living deity. Same time you have awe. It's love and awe. Because Shubriat Kana Shfela, a human being is a lowly, small creature. Omedet Badat Kala, Mu'uteh Lifnei, knowing nothing, Lifnei Tamim Dayot, when measured against the all-knower. As David said again, Ki eresh shamecha, when I see your heavens, Ma'aseh etzba'otecha, the work of your fingers, Ma'enosh ki tizkerenu. What is man that you would pay any attention to him? The book of Eov again, the end. We pale into insignificance. Remember the Rambam's recipe for curing depression to a certain extent is just don't think that you are the center of the universe. And in the rest of the Hilchot Yisodei Torah, I'm talking about the Moreh Nevukhim, In his Mishneh Torah, the Code of Jewish Law, the Rambam goes on to devote several chapters, okay, to how the world works. He gives us, of course, a Greek picture. He talks about the spheres. He talks about the mixture of matter and form. He talks about the greatness of the understanding of how the human body works. All of this is the way we get to love God and be in awe of him. He also talks about everything there was to know, briefly, about how the world works in terms of Aristotelians. That's how you'll have a key to loving God. And then, of course, when the Rambam wants to, he always finds something in Chazal to prove his point. So he finds a very obscure Midrash Halakha in the Sifrei that says, when it comes to love of God, because Parashat V'Etchanan is where you have the first chapter of the Shema, V'ahavta et Hashem Elohecha, shemitoch kach ata makir et mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam. Out of understanding the world, you will understand the one who said, and it came into existence. So, that's the Mishneh Torah. That's how we fit in the precept to become an extremely well-educated person, okay, into the Torah. It's part of mitzvat ahava, part of mitzvat hayira, and yidiyah, and yichud, unity. And we are only hinted, the only hints about how we get there, because for most people, this will be far too much. Ubiarnu sham gam herat hachachamim zal al zeh, line 1 or page 2, ha'inyan. And the Rambam says, and remember, I put in what the rabbi said, that is mitoch kach, out of becoming an extremely learned and knowledgeable person, then you can get to love God, to be in awe of him, and all those other things. שיהיה עניינה להסיר העוול או להאיר על מידה טובה המביאה לטוב החברה או נתינת הדעת האמיתית שראוי להאמינו. So, we know now that many mitzvot can be explained as first level mitzvot to get us into an orderly society. המצווה ההיא מובהרת העילה גלויות התועלת. These mitzvot are, by the way, very clear, and we don't need to ask about their goal because nobody is navuch. Nobody is perplexed about the mitzvot of what, for example, not to murder, not to steal, or not to take revenge, and not to have a blood feud. Of course, the Rambam may have a higher opinion of humanity than he ought to have, because people do that all the time. And why are we commanded to love each other, to love the stranger, which occurs in the Bible several times? Olama huzharnu aval asher navochu bahem bnei adam. Beginning of line 6. Where do the perplexities about mitzvot arise? V'nechalku adayot ad shomat satam she'en bahem to'elet klal ela mitzvah levad. To the extent that in relation to many mitzvot, many good Jews right through the ages have said there's no reason. We don't understand this, and it's something we just have to accept. Others said there is a reason. We don't dismiss. We don't say it's an act of will alone. The Rambam is always fighting the Kalam, the Al-Razali school of Arab philosophy, which said that it's all will and not wisdom. Is also fighting Saadia Gaon, who in many respects is something of an Asharite, who does talk about the difference between mishpatim and chukim, the laws we understand, the laws we will never be capable of understanding, we have to accept as purely an act of will. Okay? So there are some that defeat us on all the three levels, and they seem not to be connected neither to spiritual improvement nor to improvement of society. Okay, now, for example, line 9, Shartanes. Why can't you wear a mixture of wool and linen? What's wrong? Kilayim. Why can't you sow a field with the vine and wheat? Uvasar b'chalav. And what's wrong with mixing your milk eggs and your flesh eggs? For goodness sake, what sense does that make? By mitzvah b'kisui adam. Why do you have to cover the blood of a wild animal you've shechted? I guess if you eat venison or bison, okay? It has to be wild. Ve'gla arufa. Or a corpse is found and there's no killer identified, there's no hint. The ceremony of the breaking of the neck of the red heifer. Petech chamor. Why on earth do you need to go into a whole rigmarole to redeem, as it were, the firstborn of a donkey? Female. I, says the Rambam, am going to explain every single one. And I'm going to give you a rational, philosophically sound reason for every single one. Bilvad chalakim. Of course, except for the details. We learned this last time. You can't ask about, for example, why are 8 lambs to be offered as a sacrifice on the 3rd day of a particular festival? It's enough for you to know that we have to have a sacrificial service on the festival. Okay? I'm not going to give you the fine details, but I'm going to explain every single one. There are some mitzvot, though, the Rambam has to say, I'm going to mention to you that even defeat me, but very few. And if you read between the lines, you can understand those as well. So, sum up. Some of the mitzvot are very clear. They aim to get you to top perfection, like eternity of God, that he's incorporeal, and his power, his knowledge, etc., etc. Sometimes the mitzvah comes to remove evil from society, or to make people better in society. Okay? And therefore we have to have ideas like God gets angry with people who break the social laws. God doesn't get angry. It's all, again, a way of trying to get us to have a ruling society. Anishi Ashok, and then he ends up with a very empathetic mitzvah. He says God sometimes uses extreme language, okay, because he's so concerned that society fails to answer to the level of empathy and humanity that it should. He cites the pasuk about those who oppress the vulnerable. And he says that if you oppress the vulnerable, and the example, of course, is the widow and the orphan, right through the Bible, with the widow and the orphan. And what does it say there in Shmot? V'charapi v'haragti. My anger will be kindled and I will kill. God doesn't have anger, not in the human sense. We're attributing something to him, and he doesn't kill anybody in a direct way. We're attributing something to him, but the idea is meant to be a powerful deterrent to oppression. And it's so dramatic that he says, for when the oppressed cries out to me, v'shamativ, I will hear him. God doesn't have an ear. He doesn't listen in the way we listen. It all has to be understood very metaphorically. But ki chanun ani, I am full of mercy. God doesn't have mercy. Mercy cannot be attributed directly to his essence. But all of these ideas are there to encourage a society to grow in such a way that it will not tolerate oppression of anyone, and that the punishment for oppression, if you oppress the widow and the orphan, what does God say in the book of Shmot, Mishpatim? V'natati neshechem almanot v'yaldechem uvnechem yitomim. Your wives will be widows, and your children will be orphans. And Chazal, of course, make the point even deeper. They say your wives will never be able to remarry because there'll be no evidence of the death of the husbands. They'll be agunot forever, and the children will always be orphans. They will never find the inheritance, and they'll always feel that they have been orphaned. So this is what Rambam says, and that's how he ends the general scheme for reasons for the commandments. Now we're going to go into a long section, okay, number 29, famous section. And here the Rambam does something amazing, remarkable, and really like off the wall,
Awesome.
off the charts.
Awesome.
Rambam says now many of the mitzvot that we don't understand, Chartanes, Kilayim, Kisuidam, the way to understand them rationally is to understand that they are a reaction to idolatry. When the Torah was given, idolatry was the biggest threat. Remember, the whole of the Tanakh, you go through it, everybody's getting excited, nervous, and very, very tense about the fight against idolatry. That's the big thing, okay? Of course, today, well, some people say we still need to fight idolatry. Idolatry simply changed its face. Instead of being the ancient type of idolatry, whatever it is believing in a life that has no true God. And here I'm just going to go into something that I'm going to come back to, but I think it's just will make you prick up your ears, I hope. Okay? Anybody heard of Emil Leon Kamertz? I wouldn't expect any of you to have heard of him. He was a Belgian, after all. Okay, lived from 1878 until 1953, C-A-M-M-A-E-R-T-S. But he loved England. And in the early part of the 20th century, Melanie, he went from Belgium to England and became a naturalized English citizen. Eventually, he became professor of Belgian studies at the University of London. Okay, and he did a lot of translation into English and to French. And one of the things he did was he translated J.K. Chesterton's classical work. Now, what if you hear the name G.K. Chesterton, what do you think of? What books do you think of? G.K. Chesterton. Unmute. Anybody?
And you
He was anti-Semitic.
Okay, that's
I
very
can't-
possible. Many good writers were, but what's he famous for? What
Oh,
books?
Can't remember.
Okay, Father Brown.
I was going to say G's.
Father Brown. Okay, you know, he translated him into French. Okay, and there's a famous line that Emil Leon Kamertz actually wrote in his translation. It's wrongly attributed to Chesterton, but in fact, it was Kamertz who wrote it. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. I'll say that because I think it helps understand Rambam very well. I will say the line again. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything.
They substitute something else.
You will always substitute. The idolatry of the past took you away from God, so you believe in idolatry. And Rambam is now going to tell you what idolatry is. Idolatry is not only images, it is believing in the stars, fortune tellers, ways of somehow affecting the universe without God. You will believe in something, and that will inevitably be something bad.
Climate change.
Sorry, Shmoni?
Climate change.
Climate change. Whatever you say,
You'll
okay?
make yourself a god.
You will make yourself into a god,
No, you'll make a god for yourself.
and you'll make a god for yourself. And it's very important to understand this, because when we read this Rambam, you say, these things, these mitzvot are there to combat idolatry. It's not to combat an idolatry of the ancient times. It's to combat what idolatry stands for, replacing the true God with a different God. And you will always make yourself a different God. Okay? So in that sense, I can quote a joke that the Misnagdim, the opponents of Chassidut, tell about the Chassidim. And it's a misnagdish joke, but question is, why do the Hasidim need a Rebbe? And the reason is, of course, that the Misnagdim believe in God, so they don't need a Rebbe. Since the Hasidim don't believe in God, they do need a Rebbe because they need something to believe in. Okay, so as I said, I wouldn't hold too much by this. And once I'm on this kind of roll, let's check on the time. Of course, anyhow, I mean, just gonna tell a story. That when Yeshayahu Leibovitz went to the Kotel in 1928, of course, this was when the Kotel was a little, tiny area. Okay, Jews were not even allowed to sit down. They weren't allowed to bring a desk. They had to hold the Sefer Torah that they read. There was only room barely for a minyan. So it's at the Kotel, and it's the second day of Chag. Okay, and so in Israel it's Chol HaMoed, and the service is interrupted by a group of Hasidim coming down to the wall with their Sefer Torah, and the Rebbe dancing, singing. And then the Arabs told them to shut up. And then they get close, and they start to daven. And Leibovitz is shocked to hear that they are reading Kol HaBachor, which is a Yom Tov Dik laning for the second day of the festival in the diaspora. So he says to one of the Hasidim, he says, look, it's a halacha in the Rambam, it's cited in the Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo, that in Israel you will never read the laning for the second day of Yom Tov here because it's Chol, and you don't read out as if you're bringing the second day of Yom Tov of the Galut into Eretz Israel. So this Chosid says, and I'll just do it in Yiddish for the fun of it, but I have to work hard to get the right accent. Der Rambam is gewesen a doctor. Rabbi Yosef Karo, der Beis Yosef, is gewesen a Chuchem. Aber der Rebbe, hat Riach HaKodesh. Okay, so that is, I think, enough on the Misnagdish line. So we're going to read a little, okay, we're not going to have much time, but read a little. V'darsha Avram Avinu, line 28. Alav Shalom, Gadal be'emunat hatzaba. Abraham, our father, was raised in the faith of the Sabians. V'datam she'en Eloah rak ha'kochavim. They believed that the only gods were the stars. This is an astral religion. And we have Arabic works reflecting this. So now, if it's Avraham, it's going back 4,000 years, okay, from the Rambam's time, okay? So it's a long time ago. The sun is the greatest god, and all the stars and the planets, gods. And of course, the 5 planets, they only had 5. They're Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Okay. The sun is the big chief, okay, the chief honcho. So what happened? Abraham said, no, the sun too must be manipulated by a god. There must be something behind the sun. So for that, he was thrown into jail. Now the king thought this was very seditious, and he'd lose his kingdom if this idea was allowed to proliferate. And they get rid of the king and the priests and all that whole structure that preyed upon the beliefs of the Sabians and made their empire strong. So he drove Abraham out after he had robbed him blind. Nabatean agriculture. Now, I'm going to say a little now about both the Sabians and the book of Nabatean agriculture. The word Sabians, of course, is an Arabic word, al-Sabiya. Al-Sabiya is meant, the al-Sabiya mentioned in the Quran. They're the pagans who al-Sabiya turned aside from Islam. Okay? They were the main sects that the Muslims met first when they burst out of the peninsula in Arabia. So they used a term for every idolater. It's called a Sabian, okay? Even though they were not Sabians. So, because not everybody, if we didn't understand idolatry in terms of Babylon and Assyria until the 19th century, when the German archaeologists started to unearth what was left of the great palaces and temples of in present-day Iraq and Iran, then we understood what real idolatry was about. But medieval Arabs all believed that everybody was a star worshipper, okay? Sun god and the planets, and they called them the Al-Sabiya, the Sabians, of course, except of course for Jews and Christians who were entitled to dhimmi status. Now, this was in fact the ancient astral religion that the Muslims discovered in the era of Haran. Haran is where Abraham lived and his family lived. So they, in the Quran, they put the Sabians with Abraham, and there's this story. By the way, biblical figures figure right through the Quran. Abraham, Nimrod, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Noach, David, Shlomo, they're all there. And of course, Yishmael, all right? But, you know, we're not going to go into Islam now. The Nabatean Agriculture was a book that somebody called Ibn Waqshiyah, who lived in the 10th century, claimed to have translated into Arabic from an ancient Chaldean manuscript. The Chaldeans were meant to be like the Sabians. He forged it. Like many books, they're forgeries, you know. Sefer Niflaot HaMaharal that Yudala Rosenberg wrote in the 19th century, of course, is a complete forgery, okay? But this is the way of the world, especially in the past when you needed a big name. So Ibn Waqshiyah presents to the Arabic-speaking world a book that claims to describe the religion of the ancient idolaters that Abraham had to fight against, and that becomes their fixed idea of what idolatry is. And the Rambam goes on with that. He didn't know anything else either. So everything he learned about idolatry, and he explains to at length how he searched their books and read them all, is all from Arabic sources that are based upon a forgery by Ibn Waqshiyah of what the Sabians originally were. Okay, so
What do you mean it's a forgery?
it wasn't that there was an ancient Chaldean manuscript. He had no Chaldean
Not a forgery.
manuscript.
It's a
Well,
fiction.
okay, sorry. It is a false attribution, but it is really worse than that because he claimed he's translated a book from Chaldean and he never did. He wrote it in Arabic. Bit like the stories we have about the Zohar, not going to go into Rabbi Moshe de Leon and all of those theories, but again, we know that the rabbi I mentioned to you a couple of times ago went to the widow to check whether he actually had copied down a manuscript of the Rashbi or not. This is something that goes on all the time in the medieval world, okay? Name of the rose and all that, Umberto Eco. All right, you're dealing with the need to have some source that is respectable. Anyhow, so this is just a brief story of the Sabians and the Book of Nabatean Agriculture. Why the Book of Nabatean Agriculture? Well, why would you need to know how to manipulate the stars and be an astrologer? But of course, Rambam rails against, because idolatry is theurgic. In other words, you worship idols because you won't have a way of controlling the world. And in an agricultural society, which medieval Islam was, you need to control rain, sun, crops, agriculture. That's your wealth, your land. So you worship the idol by knowing about the stars, by knowing how to sow at the right time, reap at the right time when you have the constellation of Saturn passing through Mercury with a little nod to Venus at the side and with a whole lot of other stars on the way. Then you will be able to succeed. This is the power of idolatry. And then images come to stand in for the stars. Science is used to make the images speak and move. And they had great hydraulics and mechanics and acoustics in those days. And this was a very powerful and also very sensual way of living a life. So it's a lot more than just bowing down to a stone. All right. So the Rambam then goes on to say, okay, where are we? Right. Line 35, last word line. Ve'en safek etzli, shu alav shalom, kasher chalak al da'at bnei adam kulam, shayu mekalalim u'meganim u'mevazim oto. Abraham was cursed for what he was saying. And there's proof of that from the Torah. Did you ever think when you read Lech Lecha, God says to Abraham, Va'avarecha mevarachecha, line 37, u'mekalelcha aor, and I will put under a curse those who curse you. Why was Abraham cursed? Do we read about Abraham being cursed? In Ur HaKasdim, he was cursed. And that's why God has to tell him, not only will I bless you, but I'll also curse those who curse you. Okay. Now, Vayacharit inyano mashenireo hayom mehaskim rov, and interesting. He actually prefigures the Abraham Accords. He says Abraham becomes the figure who is going to bring the whole world together again. Okay? Even those who are not the seed of Abraham, everybody will come to believe in Abraham's message of the one God, that idols need to be disposed of, and only God, because if you don't worship God, you'll make another God who is much worse. He says, look, Christianity and Islam bring the word of God. There are barbarians who won't listen, but we are slowly beginning to get together in one Abrahamic covenant. Now we get to the image bit. So the stars all get their images of gold and of silver, and we divide up the world according to the influence of different stars, and we build temples and we put in the images. Okay? And then people believe that the stars are going to actually be communicated with via the images, and the images, of course, spoke. I mean, idolatry, very sophisticated. There's hydraulics, mechanics, acoustics. Idols did amazing things. You went there for a show. Then you have prophets who speak in the name of the idols. I will get you into the idols' audience, okay? And then you'll be able to have your wishes fulfilled. We do anything to have our wishes fulfilled. We'll believe in anything if we have a problem and we think that something is going to solve it, even if it's highly irrational and therefore off the Maimonidean path of what is the right thing to do. And then trees and the Asherah, and he goes on and on about the trees. And this chapter, by the way, is much longer than the extract I gave you. I hope that you'll read it in your spare time at home, okay? But he describes all sorts of legends involving biblical figures. All this comes through in the Arabic literature of the time. He says, Nevea Baal, Unevea Asherah, line 5, mention the context of Eliyahu Hanavi, are the Sabians. Okay? Of course they're not. Baal and Asherah belong to a Canaanite fertility cult. But Rambam didn't know that. All he knew was the Sabians in the book of Nabatean agriculture. So he identifies the prophets that Eliyahu Navi slaughtered on Mount Carmel to be Sabians, okay? That the Baal and the Asherah are also Sabians, and they're basically star worshippers and astrologers. And he says, of course, in his own typical Maimonidean language, the stupidity and the craziness spread in the world, and everybody followed the herd, followed the herd. אז בזה המין מן הדמיונות ונולדו בהם דעות והיה מהם And then we have Monen Umachashev Umachashev V'Chovechave V'Shoel V'Yidoni Doresh El Hamitim. Yes, I have to translate all of these. I think I made a catalog. Just have to listen to me read it off. Familiar spirits, wizards, are making to pass through fire. Molech, pass the babies through fire, not to burn them up. Diviners, soothsayers, enchanters, sorcerers, charmers, necromancers. And he gives you a description of all of this in his Mishneh Torah. Do you really want to know what necromancers do? Or read the section from line 14 until line 31, the difference between a Baal of familiar spirits and a necromancer is that the necromancer goes into the cemetery after he's fasted and drinks all sorts of things like rat's legs and scorpion's venom, and he lies down and he hears the dead talking, whereas that's what the Baal of does. So that's why the Baal of Shaul, okay, Endor, she was a Baalat of, she called up the spirit of the dead. Whereas a necromancer, he actually communes with a skull. That he takes a skull, empties it out, of course, gets rid of all the flesh. Alas, poor Yorick, okay, the skull. And all that you see, and then the skull starts to speak. Talked about that last week in the Trafim, okay? They start to speak, and you are convinced that the skull is speaking. The Rambam puts in a very important line in Mishneh Torah, line 20. Or somebody who speaks from their armpits, or they put a bone in their mouth. Nitmelo sheshama dvarim. You think because you are conditioned to want to hear, you will hear. When you do not have a God, you'll make a God. You will hear the diviner and the soothsayer and the seance. It'll all work. That's because it's you. It's not actually there. Okay? And in the next section, again, from his Perush LaMishnah, Masechet Avodah Zarah, he says, line 25, V'lo yadu shem dvarim betelim. These are vanities. Kozvim shehizira me'ma Torah kamo shehizira me'a sheker. Torah forbids you to do things because it forbids you to engage in the world of lies and deceit. והם הדברים שזכו לפרסום רב אצל האומות, ושורש זה הצבא, והם העמים אשר יצא אברהם אבינו יצא מכללם, וחלק על דעותיהם הנסדות במה שעצר השם ליבו מן החוכמה. Abraham discovered God. The rest of the world was with the Sabians. So the first struggle that the Torah had to engage in was to struggle with idolatry. But idolatry is much wider than you think in a simplistic way of bowing down to an idol. So I'm going to develop this next time. We'll read a little more and then we will move on with the other introductory portions. Rambam has 6 chapters that deal with the principles underlying the mitzvot. But the first one is many of the mitzvot, and here I think I'll stop the share unless you want to ask me a question. Well, stop it anyhow. And Yael, can we unmute, please? If you can.
Everyone can unmute himself. I
Okay,
can't
you
unmute
all
from you.
unmute yourselves. The Rambam is going to say that the first challenge of the Torah, okay, is to eradicate idolatry with everything that it stood for. So many of the mitzvot are in fact traced by the Rambam to idolatrous practices in ancient times. He thinks that that is the idolatry of Avraham Avinu. He's undoubtedly very mistaken from a historical perspective, but it doesn't matter. The principle to him is that idolatry is connected with some type of other way of organizing your life, which will be much worse. Okay? So the belief in the stars and the control of the imagined control you have, which is all false and simply allows a cartel of manipulators, kings and priests, okay, to manipulate you into doing things that will preserve their power, and they all do terrible things. So, and in religion too, by the way, if you're not on the Maimonidean track and you're not on the intellectual and spiritual correct path to God in the name of religion, you will make yourself other gods. Of course, I had a little dig at Chassidut, okay? Again, because it does in a way jive with this principle that you have to be very careful when there is an alternative, as it were, to the true God. But then, of course, we have to accept Maimonides' definition of what a true God is. But this is what he's saying. He's always going at the end of the day to be making this point. And this point is a point that's valid today. So that take a mitzvah like Shartnez. I mean, Shartnez in the book of Nabatean agriculture is forbidden because you mustn't mix the vegetable life, which is the flax, with the wool, which is the animal life. They had a whole concept of keeping, because of astral calculations, you have to keep the separation between what grows in the earth and what comes from living things. So the important point here, I guess, is that Rambam is going to find something in the culture of the time, okay, which the Torah has used in order to fight anything that resembles idolatry in this broad sense. So he's going out of the Torah, and he tells us at length how he read all the books of the Sabians, all the Nabatean agriculture, the books of the dead, the books of the spells. Rambam spent time reading this stuff in order to explain the mitzvot of the Torah, the divinely given work, which Rambam says is Torah is min hashamayim, may not be changed, no word can be altered. It's the same Rambam. This is an amazing phenomenon that we, I guess, encounter all the way through. The Rambam finds the median point always between faith in the traditional way and these amazing intellectual adventures. He is able to go to idolatry and study the text. He comes back to the Torah and says, this is why there's a mitzvah of Shatnez. This is why there is a mitzvah of Kelaim. And I'm also going to tell you why it's important never to break this commandment, even though you and I may not be Sabians at the present time. But of course, we may always be like Sabians, even though we think we are being good Jews. So I think I have said enough. Would anybody like to comment? We will do a little more to make the idea a little clearer, in the sense that we'll provide more illustrations next time, and then we'll move on to other aspects of reasons for the commandments. And perhaps we'll have a chance before the Shiurim end to have a look at one particular group of mitzvot and see how the Rambam goes one by one through these mitzvot, the ones that are not easily understood, of course, and gives a reason for each and every one. First of all, Jean, and then Melanie.
So Rambam seems to say that the Shoelet off is pure imagination. But when you read the chapter in Shmuel, when Shaul is consulting the, how do you call it in English? The
witch of Endor.
We have
and he gets Shmuel, right?
What?
And Shmuel comes up.
Yes, and we have the impression that it is real.
Jean, what do you mean? People who believe in illusions are more sure and certain that their illusions are real than anything that you can present to them in terms of physical evidence. If you want to believe, you will believe no matter what. This is the human condition, of course. Think about Shaul. He's facing a battle. He's lost. He has no confidence. He knows that Shmuel left him. Shmuel made him, and Shmuel cast him aside. His problems with Jonathan, his son, not supporting him, with David, he goes deeper and deeper. He's in a depression. You know he is. He needs a musician to play for him. Shaul is at the end of his tether. He's facing a battle. He's grasping at straws. And when people are in great trouble and depression, they'll grasp at any straw, however irrational they want to believe. So he sees Shmuel, and he projects upon Shmuel his end. tomorrow you will be with me, because Shaul knows he's going there. Of course, you can ask a question that Ramban asked. I mean, the encounter between Yaakov and the Ish, the man, the wrestling match, okay, before the meeting with Esav. Rambam says this is, of course, again, in his mind, it happened. He's working out things that he has to work out before he meets his brother, and he succeeds. But Vatuchal, he succeeds. He manages after so many years to eventually, it's like a major therapy session, okay? And Yaakov is able to put that ghost to sleep. And the sun shines. He passes through Peniel, he goes up to his brother, and everything works out fine. Ramban says, but if it wasn't real, why was he limping? And what does the Ralbag say? Psychosomatic. If you have a powerful dream, or you go through a very powerful experience, it can affect the way your body moves. And he felt that he had, as it were, been injured or touched. In other words, he knew. And it's psychosomatic. The effect of this image was so strong. And we know that, I'm sure anybody in the world of medicine knows that you can be affected physically by what happens to you mentally and emotionally. So that's a full answer. The Rambam would have no problem, John, with answering at that point.
What about the Rambam when Yehoshua stops the sun and the moon?
Of course, you know as well as I do that the Rambam says he doesn't. It's just a figure of speech. He did something amazing in the battle which he won. Melanie.
Is he saying that rules like Shatnez, which were practiced to some degree by the Nabateans and so on, is he saying that they became incorporated by Judaism because Jews were drawn to those idolatrous practices and needed to be therefore accommodated?
And this,
paradoxically, by choosing those rules, but by investing them with a Jewish idea of the sacred.
I guess so. I mean, it didn't come quite clearly across, so I have to sharpen what I said. The Sabians mixed wool and linen. I think I got that a little askew. Sabians, because they wanted to have a mixture between the world of growing things, plants, and the world of the animals. They needed that for a certain consolation thing. So the Torah therefore says, do not wear shatnez.
I see. That's the other way around. Okay. Yeah.
It's to keep them away from idolatrous practice.
Because I understand, but the reason I asked was because the stuff in the temple, the sacrifices and so on, I was given to understand that was, at least in part, because that was what idolaters did. And in order to wean the Jewish people away from that, you had to basically not go too far away from those practices. You just had to take those practices and invest them with a Jewish sense of the sacred.
Exactly. And we're going to read that in Maimonides in the next chapter. So there are two ways of fighting the Sabians and this whole world of ideas. One, you declare forbidden, verboten, anything that they did and that they saw value in. And then if you are not going to get anywhere close to those, you won't be sucked into something worse. And at the same time, you have to know that if you can't beat them, you join them, but you don't join them their way, you join them in the godly way. So what you do is you find a compromise. There is two ways which you tell your kids who want to protect your kids. One, never go there. Two, if you are going to go there, do this, that, and the other. And as I said, we'll talk about that. We'll see Rambam talking about that in the next week or two.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to wish us all a Chanukah Sameach, a Freilichen Chanukah. I'm going to wish everybody a Busurot Tovot, Yeshuot, and Nechamot.
Amen.
And may the festival be a precursor of a great light for us, the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and the entire world.
Amen.
Amen.
We will be on next week, same time, same channel. A little more of Maimonides on the reasons for the commandments. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody,
Bye.
and be well.
Thank you.
A pleasure.